don't need a motion or roll call, so. Okay, this time I would entertain a motion to reopen the meeting.
So moved.
Second. Motion and a second, discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor? Actually, we should do a roll call since we left the room. So, Member Clerk, would you please do first I finish the motion. All those in favor, signify by aye.
Aye.
All right, motion passes. Member Clerk, could you please do a roll call?
Yes, Member Rayland.
Here.
Member Tyson's here. Member Christensen. Here. Member Corcoran. Here. Member Hagelin.
Here.
Member Peterson.
Here.
Member Mayfield.
Here. All present.
All present.
All right, with that, we will move on to 11.2 donations. Member Christensen, would you like to read those?
Yes, this month we received $25,623.15 in donations from the following. Forest Lake Wrestling Booster Club, $15,553.15 for assistant coaches. Gerald and Connie Hendrickson, $2,500 for assistance with negative lunch balances throughout the district. $2,400 from the Red Line Club from girls hockey, a payment towards coach buses. $2,000 from the Lions for the Forest Lake Area Schools Community Education Program. $550 from Brian and Susan Gunst from Tuscandi Elementary School Nutrition Department negative lunch balances. From Forest Lake Culvers, $530, again, throughout the district for negative lunch balances. From Landmark Insurance Services, $500, again, for the district negative lunch balances. $400 from the Blue Line Club, from the Forest Lake Boys Hockey Booster Club payment for coach buses. $200 from Julius and Cheryl Hanna, again, negative lunch balances throughout the district. $200, Joseph and Nancy Molnar, negative lunch balances throughout the district. $200 from Jesse Johnson Insurance Agency, again, negative lunch balances throughout the district. William and Jill Somrock, $150 for negative lunch balances throughout the district. $110 from the Forest View Elementary PTA for kindergarten field trip fees. Jean and Kathleen Nordquist, $100 for negative lunch balances, and the remaining of these will be negative lunch balances throughout the district. $100, Robert and Linda Rigg. $50, Donald Neuter Family Living Trust. $50, Marlis Holt. $30, Larry TG. And I move we accept with appreciation these generous donations.
We have a motion and a second, discussion. I just want to say those are very generous donations, and as always, the community is always very generous with the Forest Lake Area Schools, and I really appreciate that.
Even to get those negative lunch across the district and paying for those kids with lunch, it's really wonderful. Thank you so much.
Any further discussion? Member Rayfield?
And I just would like to also thank our booster clubs. You know, they do such incredible work for, all our sports clubs and activities, and yeah, they do a lot of work. That money is not easily raised, and they're very generous with their time.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of accepting the donations as read signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. We will move on to 11.3, the approval of the 2023 legislative platform. Dr. Massey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you're aware, the legislature convened this week, and this legislative session, they will set the 2-year biennial budget for the state of Minnesota. Obviously, education is a big part of the budget, and you see in this set of agenda priorities where I would recommend, the administration would recommend our focus be. The legislature has a record surplus of $17.6 billion. You shouldn't get too caught up in that big number. The number to really focus on is the $6 billion figure that they have available to them to dedicate to ongoing and renewable expenditures. We would recommend in this proposal that for our district, and frankly, certainly many districts, but specifically for our district, that there be 3 primary focus areas for our effort at the legislature. One would be our transportation sparsity bill. We currently have the bill in draft form. We'll be seeking signatures on this bill. It's the same bill that we have had written the last number of years. It's important to recognize that historically, this topic has been a priority for our district. I recognize retired Representative Bob Detmer and his effort on this task over the last number of years. We are a unique district in our size, with districts that are smaller in size with the same enrollment, get the same figures because transportation is funded per pupil, not the actual cost of miles a district drives. It is a broken formula. We are not suggesting that they fix that formula, although that would be the wise thing to do. We just need the money that we are, that's due to us, given the sparsity that we have in our district and the deficit that we incur with our large district transportation. So we are prepared to lobby on that front, meeting with our local representatives and members of the Education, Finance, and Policy Committees in both the Senate and the House. In addition to that, emphasis around covering special education cross-subsidy. In 1995, when special education laws were put in place by the federal government, supported by the state, there was a promise to fund district costs up to 40%. District costs statewide and nationwide are covered at about 15, maybe 16% now. Because of that underfunding of special education cross-subsidy, we incur, or maybe the better way to say that is we draw $6.5 million every year from our general fund to cover costs that were promised relative to special education costs. This is not, I would emphasize, this is not a suggestion that the kids receiving special education services don't deserve every ounce of service that they get. But that's promised to fund it, and the state promised to fund it, and the state needs to meet that obligation. And lastly, the per-pupil funding formula is a formula that is the core piece of the core way in which the state funds public schools and public education. It's based on per-pupil funding. Had the state simply applied an inflationary increase to that for the last 25 years, each of the last 25 years, we would be getting $1,800 more per pupil than we do today. So when legislators talk about fully funding education, we would suggest that they focus in those three areas and make significant progress. They have the resources to do it. We are underfunded as a school system. So with that, administration would recommend approval of those three agendas and priorities.
We have a motion on 11-3.
I'm going to amend the motion by striking out the second bullet point.
We don't have a motion.
So move.
Motion, do we have a second? A motion and a second, discussion.
I have a point of information if I may. Point number 3, the first bullet point, we're talking about sticking with funding formulas for inflation. What metric are we using for that? Is that
Either the IPE or the CPI index, and they're roughly equivalent in the gap in funding. So stabilize it and index it to either or, and they would be making a significant priority income.
So our platform of leaving that open for interpretation?
Let the legislators figure it out.
Okay.
Move to amend the motion by striking out the second bullet point under item 3, allowing school boards to renew existing referendum.
I'd like to second
We have an amendment and a second, discussion on the amendment.
I just believe that this is removing the voice of the people in how the district is funded. The voters in our community want more say in how and when their tax dollars are used, not less. This is setting a bad precedence and an approved will only drive a wedge between taxpayers and school administration.
Further discussion?
I'd like to add to that too, that, especially if you're just going through the school board election, there's a lot of factors in play. And my fear, this body would be improving body for ongoing levies, is that the school board elections would become very myopic. It would be simply, do you support the levy, do you not support the levy? And instead of having a diverse group of viewpoints that we have here, and qualified individuals that we have at this table, we may end up with people whose only concern is pass the levy or don't pass the levy.
Further discussion? Number 8.
Yeah, I would just say that, number one, it's renewing levies, and you've seen over and over how districts are really driven to a cliff because the levies are used to make up the shortfalls from the state. And then the districts all around the state have become reliant on them. And so that then as they come up for renewal, it's this precipice that they come up with that if those renewals fail, then there's a bunch of layoffs, because schools are mostly employees, right? They're mostly teachers. And so that if these referendums fail, then you get this big layoff of all these, of staff. And so that because the state has pushed local districts into a position of needing these referendums to keep basic services going, why not let school boards, if the public has approved them, to allow them to continue going, and so that you don't get these big cliffs that school districts are continually approaching as the 4 years or 3 years or 5 years kind of comes to an end. I think really having this is the state's way of admitting that they made a big mistake in underfunding schools, so that schools had to go out to their public and local taxpayers to fund their schools. Now, I might support a levy or an amendment like this if, in fact, the state came through and actually funded schools without local property tax, but I don't see that happening, so I'm going to vote against this amendment.
Member Christensen?
Can I just ask a question? So it says renew existing referendum. So the public would have already voted that they agreed that we could spend that money. And so this here saying exist would just mean the public has already voted that it's okay, and then they voted us in as a school board, and then we can just continue on with what was already agreed upon. Is that correct? Yes.
Member Abel made good points about, the state's role in this, but I think, by having these levies come up, or referendums come up, and having the public voters voting on this, it's going to put, like Member Abel said about, potentially being layoffs or program cuts or something else, that also puts pressure or the onus back on the people to put pressure on the state, saying, hey, we don't want these program cuts. You promised to fully fund education. Live up to your promise now.
Well, to Member Rabeline's thought and yours and the Penguin, I think there's some validity to that. But we've been on that cliff, and I've been on that cliff where we have cut to the bone. Lights in the curriculum coordinator's offices all went out. We cut and cut, we closed the school. These are real constraints for us. When you look at the dollars that we pay out of our general fund when other districts can put them right in there and use them, we don't have that. So I don't want to get on that cliff. And I agree with Member Christensen. This is something that the voters already voted on. It's something that they're aware of. They know we're not increasing it. So it's something that they've already done. So I will not be voting to take this out. I've been on delegate assembly. This always comes up. It's finally kind of bubbling up to the top. I do understand what you're saying about, creating that rock between our community and voters and what's going on with our district. I don't want that either, because I'm always out there talking to people and immersed in the community. But these are real constraints, and that's a lot of money that we pay out of our general fund for these things, and we just have to say, disability, so I will not be voting to take that out.
Caroline?
I just heard saying, crisis plan is being taken. But yeah, that was part of that committee that was together in 2018, discussed the levy. I do understand what she's saying about Cliff. I would like to point out that our community did come through, and I trust our community and our voters to come through for us again when that time has come. I never feel comfortable about taking the voice away from voters for the reason anyway. And I am concerned about shifting the focus, especially for board elections, and it sets up a poor public perception as well. Now, that said, if this does become law, I would hope it's not something that required for boards to undertake, so they would have the option to restore that back in voters' hands. Perhaps that's an additional amendment. I don't know what the legislation looks like.
Any further discussion? Mr. Chair, if I can clarify, the statement of allowing school boards, it would be at the discretion of the boards. It would be a board action, not an automatic.
And we're elected officials to be the guardians of our district. As far as the financial and keeping our schools at the highest performing that we can. And I've been through the same thing with Member Tyson, cuts on cuts. And because we couldn't pass a levy. It was many, many years of a lot of pain. Our district and our students are there and our staff. And if we can have some kind of authority to keep what we have without having to struggle and go through all those painful things again, I'm all aboard. I think this, at least it gives us the opportunity to do it. Just like you say, we don't have to do it, we don't need to, but having that option to be able to do it, I think that as a district, I think that's great.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of accepting the amendment as presented by Member Hagelin, signify by aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, signify by nay. Nay. Nays have it, amendment fails. Back to the original motion, 11.3. Is there any further discussion on 11.3? Hearing none, all those in favor of accepting the legislative platform as presented, signify by aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. We'll move to 11.4, resolution directing the superintendent and administration to make recommendations for reductions in positions, programs, and services and reasons therefore for 23-24.
Chair, this item takes us back to an item I spoke to in my update. We'll be doing our budget work. As part of that, we need permission, administration needs permission to go through the exercise of creating a staffing scenario and recommendations that will come to this board in April. That may or may not involve reduction, but those would be reductions in already board approved positions. So we would be asking for the approval to at least consider that if necessary, all the budget pieces together and consider that administration recommends.
Move to approve 11.4.
We have a motion and a second, discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor of accepting 11.4 as presented, signify by aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. We'll move to 11.5, out-of-state travel by school board members, policy 103B.
The purpose of this policy is to control out-of-state travel by school board members as required by law. Policy committee has reviewed this policy and are recommending no changes at this time. Administration recommends approval with that notation. I move to approve this policy.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. 11.6, employee alcohol and other drug use policy 422.
The purpose of this policy is to address employee drug and alcohol use and its effect on the workplace and an employee's performance on work duties. The changes you see noted in this policy are largely a response to the law passed on July 1st or put into effect on July 1st, 2022, approving the sale of edible cannabis and THC. So you'll see language in this policy now including provisions restricting the use of cannabis and THC. You can see that language throughout the policy. Administration would recommend approval.
To approve 11-6.
Second.
I have a motion and a second on 11.6, discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye, motion passes.
We have to have a roll call on this.
We technically do not, but we have in the past. Somebody would like a roll call? Okay. 11.7, harassment and violence policy 425.
The purpose of this policy is to maintain a learning and working environment that is free from harassment and violence on the basis of race, color, creed, religion, national origin, sex, age, marital status, familial status, status with regard to public assistance, sexual orientation, including gender identity or expression, or disability. This policy requires an annual review. Policy committee has spent time reviewing this policy and are recommending no changes. At this time, the administration will recommend approval.
Motion.
So moved.
Second?
Motion and second, discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. We will move to 11.8.
The purpose of this policy is to maintain a safe and healthy environment for employees and students by prohibiting the use of alcohol, toxic substances, and controlled substances without a physician's prescription. The policy committee has reviewed this policy. Administration continues to have discussion regarding this policy, and through that discussion, administration has recognized the need to have further conversation on a couple of elements related to this policy, and administration would recommend that we refer back to policy committee for further discussion. I move to that.
Move to send it back.
Second?
Motion and second, discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor of referring 11.8 back to the policy committee signify by the sign of aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. 11.9, student medication policy 528.
It's a fairly long statement on background, but it's important to put that out there. The purpose of this policy is to set forth the provisions that must be followed when school district staff members administer non-emergency and emergency prescription medication to students at school. This policy does not address medications administered or directed to be administered by responding emergency personnel. For the purposes of this policy, prescription medication or prescribed drugs or medication refers to any medication, whether a prescription is required to purchase it or not. Medication that may be purchased without a prescription is still subject to the terms of this policy and district procedures, and may not be carried by nor dispensed by students except as expressly addressed in this policy. The primary change in this policy is, you'll see on page 528-4, we are with changes in statute, recommendations with MSP. You'll see language there addressing district administration of EpiPens for students having allergic reactions. And with that, administration would recommend approval.
Actually moved it with directed that MDH guidelines need to be reviewed and included, and that district nursing professionals be part of the process.
I have a motion and a second. Discussion on the motion.
I actually brought this policy to the attention of the board in September concerning a medication concern that I had with my own son and how it may have prevented him from returning to school this year. The MDH guidelines are actually 69 pages long. There are policies about 4.5. Just through personal experience, I can tell you that the summarization here isn't complete enough to give our staff the proper tools to administer medication in a manner that's safe for our students. And I want to make sure that that is not overlooked, which is why I feel it would be adequate to commit this back to the committee have them review that along with the MPH guidelines and bring a proposal back on this.
Any further discussion? Go ahead. I was going to say, I'd like to say that we do need to pass a policy for the EpiPen portion, and that's important. I would recommend we vote motion down and then pass a policy. However, you did get appointed to the policy committee, and it can be referred to policy at any time, so we could take it back up to the committee, again, in short order, in order to process through that. That way we could accomplish the goal of getting the EpiPen work done, and then you would be able to accomplish the goal of having the conversation around that policy.
If that's appropriate, I will remove my motion.
I think we should vote motion, once the motion's been made and seconded, it's the body's motion, so we should vote that motion now and then have another motion. Is there any further discussion? On his motion to refer it back.
Yes, there is. One second.
I'm sorry.
Comment.
Did you withdraw the motion?
You can't withdraw a motion once it's been made and seconded. It
It's-
belongs to
it
the body
belongs
as
to
a
the body.
whole,
We have to vote on
and we have to vote on it.
Okay, so this has already had a first reading and been worked on by our policy committee. It's also had the addition of the MSBA language added to it, which they have a whole slew of team of lawyers and people that look at all this stuff. That's how they do for us. So I'm not sure, you know, of course, the MBA, those documents are going to be a plethora. So I think this is a great policy. I think it reads well. The committee's worked on it. It's had a first reading. So I'm just kind of confused by Member Rabeline's motion. So I'll be voting for approval of this.
The motion on the floor is to refer it back to committee, to be clear, so that's correct, Member England?
Correct.
All right, any further discussion on the motion to refer it back to committee? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by aye. Those opposed? Nay. Motion fails. Do we have a motion on 11.9? To approve 11.9?
Move to approve.
Motion to approve, do we have a second?
Second.
A motion and a second to approve 11.9. Discussion. Member Reveline?
The only thing I'd like to add is I don't want this to get lost in the annual renewal, so I do want to make sure the policy committee doesn't take it up, but look at the MPH guidelines, the safety concerns right now.
Mr. Chair, I would add that I think as early as this middle of this month, that we know the beginning of that discussion.
Then I will be voting for the approval of the policy.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving 11.9 as presented signify by aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. We will move to 11.10, Student Transportation Safety Policy 531.
The purpose of this policy is to provide safe transportation for students and to educate students on safety issues and the responsibility of school bus ridership. You can see the added language with respect to bus drivers, primarily around their obligation to this policy to report their own any violation of bus driving that they have using their own personal vehicle. And we spell out specific things that must be reported to the Minnesota Division of Driver and Vehicle Services Division. So with those changes, administration is recommending approval.
What is your pleasure with 11.10?
So moved. Second.
Motion and a second to approve 11.10 as presented. Do we have any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by the sign of aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. We will move to 11.11, Graduation Requirement Policy 613, Director Jacobson.
Chair Peterson, members of the board, Dr. Massey. The purpose of this policy is set forth the graduation requirements from the Forest Lake Area School District. This is the second reading on this policy, just a few changes that I would draw your attention to. The first being that the Director of Teaching and Learning or designee can be named the district test administrator. We have testing data and assessment test administrator in our district. And so this person serves in that role for us, has done so for, and to do so, will do that role. On page 2 of this policy, it refers to some credit requirements, changes at the middle level. That's really to come in alignment with the new middle school academic program that you heard myself and middle school principals speak to the board about over the past couple of years. We just want to make sure this policy reflects what that program looks like. And then the last piece of information I would draw your attention to is a change, not in the total number of graduation requirements at the high school, but then where those credit requirements exist. Currently, we have, in the area of science, we have 3.5 credits required to graduate for science. What we're doing is we are not reducing the number of science courses that we offer, but instead we're taking one of those half credit requirements and opening that up for students to choose whatever half credit course or elective, whether that be in science or any of the other elective options or departments that we have, that they could take that and still they would need 26 credits to complete for graduation. So this has been through the policy committee, and this is the second reading, as I said, mentioned earlier, on this policy. Administration would recommend approval.
We have a motion to approve 1111.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor of approval of 1111, signify by aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. We will move on to 1112. Minutes of the December 1st and 15th, 2022 meeting. We have a motion to approve minutes.
So moved. Second.
We have a motion and second. Discussion.
Requested this.
Okay. Roll call, you mean?
Sorry. Thank you.
Do we have any further discussion? All those in favor of approving the minutes of the December 1st and 15th meeting? Member Clerk, would you please say roll call?
Member Rayfield? Member Riverline?
Yes.
Member Tyson votes aye. Member Christensen? Member Corcoran? Aye. Member Haglund? And Member Hughes?
Aye. Okay, we will move on to 1113. Appointment of district superintendent or designee and school board chair to engage legal counsel. Dr. Massey.
You'll see in your packet, earlier in the agenda, it was in part of the routine action items. It was pulled for discussion at this point in the meeting. You can see those legal counsels are named plan, and the administration would recommend approval.
We have a motion to approve the 1113.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and second. Discussion. Member Evelyn.
Yeah, I have 2 questions here I'd like to ask, if possible here. Just a clarification on the text. The way this reads, it's a little confusing to me. I read district superintendent or designee and school board chair. Does that imply that the superintendent or his designee need to approach legal counsel together? Or can any of those 3 individuals go to the single source?
Any of those 3 individuals would be able to go to a single source. So the superintendent could go to legal counsel if he needed to.
Okay.
His designee could, a member of the staff that he needed to have contact them. Or I could, should the need arise that outside of the superintendent, we needed to contact as a board our legal representation.
Okay. In that case, I'd like to make a motion to amend it by striking school board chair and replacing that text with any 2 school board members. Could you repeat that? I'd like to strike the text school board chair and replace it with any 2 school board members.
We have an amendment to the motion and a second. Do we have discussion? Member Evelyn?
Yeah. So it,
Yeah, we had a second.
I don't want this to sound like I have an issue with the school board chair. That's not the case whatsoever. But I think establishing a reliance on a singular individual for such a critical function that is likely to occur when a timely response is required is irresponsible of the board. We don't even rely on our superintendent in that matter. We allow him to specify a designee. So I think it would be much more responsible as a board if we have some mechanism to to allowing other individuals to engage legal counsel if Member Peterson is not available.
Corcoran?
We could say chair or officer. And if we have a designee for him, we can have an officer backup for you, or for the chair. That's what he's saying, it's just not to just have one representative.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I just don't want it to become a singular point.
Member Rayfield?
Yeah, I've been on a couple of boards and I've seen this when a board chair needs to kind of interact with legal, and it's really an important position, but I could see a language that would say, it'd be similar to the superintendent, but a designee of the chair. So the chair would actually say, oh, I can't meet with them, this is important, that's the thing we need to resolve. And then the chair would pick a designee to do that. But I still want it in control. I want it clearly that the chair, because the chair is the central point that I've seen when kind of dealing with all the legal issues.
Further discussion, Member Tyson?
So I don't really have an objection to that, what Member Rayfield's amendment, but Member Rayfield, I'm curious, so any 7-member person, anybody on the board, not an officer, could be
Be
selected
the designee of the chair.
of the chair, so
Yeah.
whoever, you know,
Yeah.
on the board, currently serving on.
Member Repline?
I feel that's an adequate suggestion. I just want to make sure that when we, however we amend the amendment, if that's the proposal that we're going to make here, that we just make it clear that the designee of the chair needs to be another school board.
So I would recommend, just from a parliamentary and a clean process, that if we wanted to do that, we would vote this amendment down and then make an amendment that read exactly as we wanted, and then pass that. I would suggest that it would be the chair or the vice chair. Because the vice chair has been elected as the vice chair, and therefore there are 2 people available to contact them. But any further discussion on the amendment? All those in favor of the amendment as presented, signify by aye. All those opposed? Nay. Motion fails, or amendment fails. We'll move back to discussion under the amendment. Member Repline?
Move to amend the proposal by striking the school board chair and replacing the school board chair or vice chair.
Amendment and a second. Discussion under the amendment. Hearing none. All those in favor of the amendment as presented signify by aye. Aye. Amendment passes. Back to the original motion with the amendment. Appointment of district superintendent or designee and school board chair or vice chair to engage legal counsel as amended. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by the sign of aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. We will move on to new business. 12.1, first reading, school board meeting minutes, policy 107. What's that? Oh,
Mr. Chair, the purpose of this policy is to establish procedures relating to the maintenance of records of the school board and the publication of its official proceedings. The school board policy has reviewed this policy and is simply making a recommendation of legal reference language in the section around legal reference with that administration. Actually, this is a first reading, so there's no action to be taken on this policy.
We'll move on to 12.2, first reading, transportation, employee, drug, and alcohol policy 430.
All school district transportation employees whose positions require a commercial driver's license will be required to undergo drug and alcohol testing in accordance with federal law and the applicable provisions of this policy. Again, policy committee has reviewed this policy and are recommending the changes at this time.
We'll move on to 12.3, first reading, crisis management policy 538.
The purpose of this policy is to recognize the district's responsibility to provide a safe and secure environment for students, staff, parents, volunteers, community members, and visitors, and to ensure the district's preparedness in coordinating protective actions prior to, during, and after any type of emergency or potential crisis situation in the school district. Policy committee has reviewed this policy and is recommending no changes at this time.
We'll move to 12.4, first reading, technology acceptable use and safety policy 540.
The purpose of this policy is to set forth policies and guidelines for access to school district computer systems and acceptable and safe use of the internet, including electronic communication. The substantial changes recommended by the policy committee will be found on page 7, section 12, notification regarding technology providers. There's some state statute language that calls for this inclusion now in this policy. Changes in section 13, school issued devices, and section 14, limit on screen time for children in preschool and kindergarten. So I would ask that you read through those changes, reach out if you have any questions. It will come to the board in February for recommendation.
12.5, first reading, bully prohibition policy 541.
The purpose of this policy is to assist the school district in its goal of preventing and responding to acts of bullying, intimidation, violence, reprisal, retaliation, and other similar disruptive or detrimental behavior. There is a statutory reference change on page 541-7. Some related changes in legal references, and again, no action required at this time.
With that, I recommend everyone review the upcoming calendar dates. There's nothing.
Before we move on to 13, I have business. I move to rescind policy 711.
Have a motion to rescind a policy and a second.
711. I'm sorry, Joy, I don't get you.
You know that, the other thing that you have over there?
I would counter that the executive order 8021 that has expired and is referenced right in the policy makes the policy no longer valid.
Thank you for supporting the second policy.
So we got a motion and a second. Go ahead, Member Hagan, discussion.
I support the motion to rescind board policy 711, face covering policy. Many parents and community members were upset and disagreed with this policy when it was adopted over 2 years ago. The school board should not be making healthcare related decisions, especially those requiring the use of a medical device. From the FDA's website, and I quote, the FDA regulates face masks, including cloth face coverings, barrier face coverings, and surgical masks as medical devices when they are intended for a medical purpose. Medical purposes include uses related to helping prevent the spread of COVID-19. Face masks intended for use by the general public for non-medical purposes, such as for use in construction and other industrial applications, are not medical devices. It is well documented that the particle-sized viruses, such as COVID and SARS-CoV-2, range between 60 and 140 nanometers or 0.1 microns. This is is much smaller than the pore size of a surgical mask, which is 200 to 1,000 times larger, making wearing a mask ineffective as the virus particles easily pass through. There are many harmful effects to students by requiring them to wear a mask. A July 16, 2021 University of Southern California article, co-published by Girish Sood, PhD, and Jay Bakhtiara, MD, PhD, noted, and I quote, "Masking is a psychological stressor for children and disrupts learning. Covering the lower half of the face in both teacher and pupil reduces the ability to communicate. In particular, children lose the experience of empathy expressions, an essential tool of nonverbal communication. Positive emotions such as laughing and smiling become less recognizable, and negative emotions get amplified. Bonding members, teachers, and students take a hit. Overall, it is all likely that masking exacerbates the chances that a child will experience anxiety and depression, which are already at pandemic levels themselves." Another article written by Paul Alexander, PhD, published March 10, 2021 at the American Institute for Economic Research, summarized, and I quote, "Children do not readily acquire SARS-CoV-2, very low risk, spread it to other children or teachers or endanger parents or others at home. This is settled science. In the rare cases where a child contracts COVID viruses, it is very unusual for the child to get severely ill or die. Masking can do positive harm to children, as it can some adults, but the cost-benefit analysis is entirely different for adults and children, particularly younger children. Whatever arguments there may be for consenting adults, children should not be required to wear masks to prevent the spread of COVID-19. Of course, zero risk is not attainable. With or without masks, vaccines, therapeutics, distancing, or anything else medicine may develop or governmental agencies may impose." We had another article on the website, World Council for Health, originally posted on October 2nd, 2021, and updated November 12th, 2022, listed the following key risks of children wearing masks. 1, breathing problems, inadequate oxygen, and elevated carbon dioxide levels. 2, bacterial, viral, and fungal infections. 3, cognitive difficulties. 4, psychological effects. 5, dermatological effects. 6, dental effects, including gum and mouth inflammation and fungal infections. These are just some of the examples of how masks are not only ineffective against stopping the spread of viral infections, but are also physically and emotionally harmful to those who wear them, and prevent successful learning environment. If parents and guardians of the students in our district find comfort and protection masking their students to prevent illness, there is no policy barring them from doing so, and the decision should be made at their discretion. That is why I hereby support permanently rescinding policy 711.
Any further discussion? Member Rayfield?
Yeah, I'm gonna vote to not rescind it. I think it's fine to rescind it, but I'm voting no, because seriously, going to the end of a meeting and then having a motion not on the agenda, the public has not seen it, doesn't get a first reading, and it doesn't go through any committees where people can comment on it. It's just not transparent. It's just the board coming up with something and sneaking it in at the last minute. The public has not had a chance to look at it, think about it, and go. So I just do not like this approach of just throwing something out without the public seeing it. It's not transparent, right? We need to be a board that's transparent. We're open. What we do is available to everybody. People have a chance to comment on it. And this kind of thing where you just throw something out, it would have been easy to bring this forward and say, oh, it's not even applicable anymore, right? Not even applicable anymore. And now I'm going to vote no against it because you pull it out, what, it's 10:05, right? I mean, people watch online on these meetings and you're just throwing something like this out so they don't even have a chance to comment on it. So that's my take on it.
Any further discussion?
Well, I just want to mention that, Member Hagman read rather long detail. We can find long detail in the other direction. So I agree with Member Rayfield. This is just throwing something out at the last minute. It could have gone through the proper channels, so I'm going to vote against it.
Corker?
Should this be brought back to policy? Is that what the proper order of it is? So that could be a motion to do that, I mean, to follow procedures instead of this. I think we need to be a board that follows procedures.
Any further discussion? I'd like to say that I agree with Member Rayfield. I should have probably found the motion to be out of order because we approved the agenda way back at about 7:10 tonight. And somebody could have made a change, or presented a change to the agenda at that time. That being said, I entertain the motion because I understand it's a public issue and I want to make sure you have the opportunity to speak. But I concur that it should be referred back to policy so the policy committee gets the opportunity to weigh in on it. It gets put on the agenda so the public gets the opportunity to read it and then gets rescinded. And I will support the rescinding of it, but I will vote no tonight because of the process. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, Member Redwine?
Nothing precluding anybody from making a motion.
Member Hagman?
When this policy was initially submitted, did it go through and public comment and all the process back then? 2 years ago?
I believe it did go through at least 2 meetings. I don't know if it went to the policy committee, but it did go through a first reading and a second reading.
I just feel it should, if there's discussion about it not on policy, you should, if you're going to go through the policy committee in the first place, it's another reason to rescind it.
No point of information. If we do not rescind this policy tonight, it's going to come to our attention of administration. Does that mean that tomorrow morning our schools will enforce this policy to guarantee consistency?
First page of the policy. It complies with Executive Order 8021, which has been rescinded by the governor, and therefore no longer being enforced. So no,
In that case, I don't understand the hesitancy to rescind.
it's all transparency. That's a hesitancy on my part. Any further discussion? Okay, hearing none, all those in favor of the motion to rescind signify by aye.
Aye.
Those opposed signify by nay. Nay. Motion fails. Then I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So,
Second.
All those in favor of adjournment signify by aye.
Aye.